There's a version of history that doesn't appear in the history books, not because historians don't know it, but because the people who lived through it, the people who survived it, had every reason to lie about it, and they were very, very good at lying. In the winter of 1476, a man died, the man who would inspire the legend of Dracula, the man whose name alone made grown soldiers weep, the man who ruled through terror so absolute that enemy armies would turn back rather than face his wrath. But here's the thing, and this is where the actual horror begins. Nobody actually knows how he died. We have the official story, the one that survived, the one carved into history books. Vlad the Impaler, they tell us, fell heroically in battle, slain by superior Ottoman forces, a soldier's death, clean, meaningful, heroic. But what if that's not what happened? What if the real story is so disturbing, so treacherous, so psychologically devastating, that the people involved literally erased it from history? What if the man who used fear as a weapon became its final victim? Today, we're going to untangle a conspiracy of silence that's lasted 550 years. We're going to look at the evidence that was hidden, the contradictions that were buried, and the three separate narratives that all somehow became one convenient lie. And what we find is far worse than the battles, far worse than the impalement, far worse than anything you've heard about Vlad the Impaler. This is the story they didn't want you to know. Before we talk about how Vlad died, we need to understand who he was, not the legend, not the caricature, the actual man. Vlad III of Wallachia, born around 1428, a small kingdom nestled between the rising Ottoman Empire and the Christian kingdoms of Hungary and Poland. The kind of place that should have been swallowed by history, the kind of place where princes died quietly, their names forgotten within a generation. But Vlad wasn't quiet, and by the 1460s, he'd done something that seemed impossible. He'd created a military strategy so psychologically devastating that it didn't matter that his army was smaller. It didn't matter that he faced an enemy with vastly superior numbers. Because Vlad understood something that most rulers of his time didn't. That terror, real, primal, soul-crushing terror, could do what swords couldn't. His method was impalement. Thousands upon thousands of impaled corpses. He'd retreat from the Ottoman advance in 1462, leaving behind not just his army, but a message. A forest of stakes, each one topped with a dying or rotting human body. Thousands of them. Contemporary accounts speak of 23,000 impaled victims. Some historians say the number is inflated, but even if it was half that, even if it was a third, the psychological impact would have been unimaginable. Mehmed II, called the Conqueror, the man who had brought down Constantinople itself, the greatest city on earth, arrived at Vlad's retreat expecting to crush him. Instead, he found himself staring at an ocean of corpses, thousands of them, arranged like a grotesque garden, many still alive, rotting in the sun. The Greek historian Chalcondyles was there. He documented it. He described how Mehmed's battle-hardened veterans, men who had seen the carnage of Constantinople's fall, were absolutely horrified. Some accounts suggest they refused to advance further. Some suggest Mehmed himself turned his army around. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful man in the world, the man who had conquered the last great Byzantine stronghold, was psychologically broken by the sight of impaled corpses. He came to crush Vlad. He left traumatized. But here's where the story gets twisted, because Mehmed couldn't just leave it at that. He couldn't allow the world to see that he'd been psychologically defeated by a provincial prince. He couldn't allow his enemies, and he had many, to know that he'd been broken. So he did what empires do. He waited, he plotted, and he made sure that when Vlad finally fell, the story would be one of Ottoman might, of imperial superiority, of a victorious conqueror crushing an enemy. The narrative had to be controlled. You're watching this because you can smell the lie, and that instinct. So if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the moment. because what comes next is where the real conspiracy unfolds, where we expose who benefited from burying the truth. Let's talk about propaganda, because that's really what this is. That's what all of it is. After the horror of 1462, Mehmed couldn't kill Vlad directly. Vlad had his supporters. He had Hungary backing him, or at least he had Hungary's king interested in him. A direct assassination would have been messy. It would have created questions. It would have given Vlad's allies a reason to rally around his memory. So instead, Mehmed withdrew. He let Vlad's own enemies do the work, and Vlad had plenty of enemies. His own brother, Radu, was in Ottoman service. The Wallachian boyars, the nobles who ruled the country, had been systematically brutalized by Vlad's reign of terror. They'd seen their power stripped away, seen their lands confiscated, seen their families destroyed. Many of them had reason to hate him. Matthias Corvinus, the King of Hungary, ostensibly Vlad's Christian ally, had his own plans for Wallachia. He didn't want a powerful independent Vlad ruling there. He wanted a puppet. He wanted control. So when Vlad, desperate and isolated, fled to Hungary seeking aid after being overthrown, Matthias made a calculation. He arrested him. He kept him in prison for 13 years. 13 years. Vlad went from being the terror of the Ottoman Empire to being locked away, powerless, and to justify this, to explain to the Pope, to Christian Europe, why he was imprisoning what was supposed to be a Christian hero. Matthias's court produced documents, letters supposedly showing that Vlad had offered his allegiance to Sultan Mehmed, letters claiming he was a traitor to Christendom. Modern historians almost universally agree these letters were forgeries, but the damage was done. Vlad's reputation, his legend, his status as a Christian hero, it was destroyed. He went from being the Impaler, scourge of the Ottomans, to being a traitor who collaborated with the Sultan. And he sat in prison while the world forgot about him. 13 years. Think about what that does to a man. Think about the psychological deterioration, the isolation, the knowledge that everyone you fought for has abandoned you, that your allies are your jailers, that the legend you built is being rewritten by your enemies. But then something changed. Around 1475, it became politically useful for Matthias to release Vlad. The Ottoman threat was again becoming dangerous. Perhaps Matthias thought he could use Vlad as a tool, a pawn in a larger game against the Ottomans. Or perhaps Matthias simply calculated that Vlad, broken and weakened after 13 years in captivity, would be easier to control than the fierce warrior he'd once been. Either way, Vlad was released. He was sent back to Wallachia with the goal of reclaiming his throne. This is where the timeline becomes critical. This is where we start to see the cracks in the official narrative, because what happened next happened very quickly. Vlad retook his throne, that much is certain. In late 1475, early 1476, he reclaimed his capital, and then, less than 2 months later, he was dead. 2 months. That's all Vlad had. 2 months as Prince of Wallachia after 13 years in captivity. And in those 2 months, something happened. Something that killed him. Now, the official story says he died in a battle. A glorious last stand against the Ottoman forces. A heroic death fighting the ancient enemy. But there are problems with this story. Big problems. First, the timeline doesn't match. Contemporary sources give conflicting accounts of when he died. Some say December 1476. Some say January 1477. Some sources are so vague about the date that we can't actually pin down when he died within a span of several weeks. Second, the location is disputed. Where did he die? In battle against Ottoman forces? In which battle? Which Ottoman general was present? The accounts contradict each other so thoroughly that historians still argue about the basic geography of his death. Third, and this is the disturbing part, there are multiple theories about what actually killed him, and they all conflict with the official narrative. Let me lay them out for you. This is the official story. Vlad was leading a small force against Ottoman positions. A larger Ottoman force ambushed him. He was overwhelmed, killed in combat. His head was cut off and sent to Constantinople as a trophy. This story benefits everyone. It makes Mehmed look powerful. It makes Matthias look like he sent a brave man to a brave death. It gives Vlad a heroic ending. The problem? The details don't hold up. If this was a major Ottoman military victory, why isn't it documented in Ottoman records as such? Mehmed was obsessive about documenting his military achievements. Yet the sources on Vlad's death from Ottoman historians are remarkably thin. This is darker. In the chaos of battle, Vlad, wearing armor, fighting hard, was mistaken for an Ottoman soldier by his own men, and they killed him. Think about the desperation of that moment. A small Wallachian force, probably outnumbered, fighting in winter conditions, in darkness, in absolute chaos. Vlad is in the thick of it, fighting hand to hand, and in the confusion, a panicked soldier, maybe a young recruit, maybe someone desperate to survive, drives a spear through him. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, Vlad is already dead. His own men killed him. And then what? If this was the truth, Vlad's supporters would have a lot of motivation to hide it. It would be shameful. It would be a disaster for Matthias, who sent him there. It would be an embarrassment. Much better to have a story about a glorious battle, a brave death, a heroic stand. This is the most disturbing possibility. Vlad had just retaken his throne. He had been absent for 13 years. The nobles who now controlled Wallachia, the boyars, had grown used to power. They liked their position.